Okay, folks, accountability time for me. And it's not good news, not just for me, not just for software professionals, but for white-collar professionals of all stripes. And we need to talk about it, all of us, because talking about it is the only thing that might help, but more on that later. So for context, a year ago, May 2024, I made a video with this prediction. If we don't get an exponentially better ChatGPT 5 this year, then hopefully people will start recognizing that it's time to change from let's wait for better LLMs to let's take the current LLMs and let's start applying it to real-world problems. In fact, I was correct, and we did not get an exponentially better ChatGPT 5 last year, or a ChatGPT 5 at all. And although there were some noticeable improvements in reasoning models in some benchmarks, including some testing I've done, but the gains have been really modest, and we'll talk more about why I consider those gains modest later in the video. But despite being correct about generative AIs not getting much better, my hope about the important thing was unfounded. I said, hopefully people will start recognizing that it's time to change, and that has definitely not happened. If anything, that part has gotten a whole lot worse. The AI industry has caught us between a rock and a hard place, and it's getting more painful to try to survive here. So what I'm calling the hard place is that human intelligence is a very hard problem, and generative AIs are just nowhere near doing the work as well as a human, and the productivity gains the hype is insisting upon are nowhere to be seen. But that's not stopping people from believing the hype. And that's not stopping managers from laying people off because they believe that AI will be able to make the remaining people do the work of all the folks that were let go. And it's not stopping irresponsible journalists and influencers from making huge, unfounded claims in their headlines to try to get clicks and bury the actual real quotes way down at the bottom of the piece, if they mention it at all. And it's not stopping irresponsible executives from making statements that are suggestive of progress, but vague enough to be defended in court so that the journalists and the influencers can write the big headlines. And probably most importantly, it's not stopping the investors, both the professionals that are surfing the hype bubble and the consumer suckers who are going to be left holding the bag, from throwing more and more money at seemingly every company that mentions AI in their earnings calls. The actions that are hurting people and will continue to hurt people because of the unfounded belief in the hype of AI, that's what I'm calling the rock that's squishing us up against the hard place. And why am I calling it a rock? Well, because those people are acting as dumb as a box of rocks. The fuck. This is the Internet of Bugs. My name is Carl. I've been a software professional for more than 35 years now. I've been complaining about AI and bad software on the internet for more than a year here on YouTube, and I'm apparently too stupid to realize it might be a futile endeavor, but I'm also too stubborn to stop tilting at windmills. So today is about why the white-collar job world, at least here in America, is becoming so much more miserable for programmers, but also for a lot of other people, why the hype around generative AI is a big part of that, and what it's going to take to stop it. First, I'm going to run through some recent events that have hit the hype cycle, so we're all on the same page. Then I'm going to run through some reasons why there's still no evidence that hype is justified. The performance of these models as a potential replacement for humans has not significantly changed from where it was a year ago. And they're even going backwards in some ways. And after that, I'm going to try to talk about how we can try to explain to people what the gap is between the hype and the reality. Because as long as people believe the hype, it's going to be worse for everyone, but the more people we can get to see reality, the sooner and the less damaging the bubble popping will be. I'm going to start this with a great piece of research and reporting called The AI Job Crisis is Here Now from Brian Merchant at the Blood on the Machine Substack. Links below as always, including this article from TechCrunch, which is a good digestible one-page summary of Brian's work if you don't have the time to read the whole thing, although you should, it's great reporting. There's a lot in that piece, but the most stark statistic is that the unemployment rate for recent college graduates is historically high in relation to the general unemployment rate. In previous recessions like 1990, 2000, 2008, new grads had better relative unemployment rates, presumably because companies were replacing older, more expensive workers with cheaper, younger ones. But now the new grads aren't getting hired, and instead, presumably, the more experienced folks are expected to become so productive with AI that they can do their own work, plus that of the kids that would have been hired in the past, but aren't going to be now. That reporting talks about the impact on writers and artists and illustrators, and tech workers are feeling that too. And the headlines just keep coming. Quote, over 40% of the people laid off from Microsoft in mid-May were in software engineering. Microsoft CEO says up to 30% of the company's code was written by AI. That up to is doing a lot in that headline. What he actually said was, I'd say maybe 20%, 30% of the code that is inside our repos today on some of our projects are probably all written by software. Quote, Mark Benioff says that Salesforce will hire no engineers this year due to AI. Quote, over 30% of Google's new code is now AI generated. Of course, the actual quote was, I think the last time I said a number, it was like 25% of the code that's checked in involves people accepting AI-suggested solutions, and that number is well over 30% now. People accepting AI-generated solutions is AI-generated code. Sure, whatever. Quote, AI will beat human coders by the end of 2025. Now, the actual quote is, I think this is the year, at least by competitive coding benchmarks, AI becomes better than humans at competitive coding forever. Now, put a pin in that one, we'll come back to it. But the reality just doesn't seem to agree. There are a bunch of contrary headlines, but they don't get noticed as much. Quote, time saved by AI, offset by new work created, studies suggest. Quote, AI isn't ready to replace human coders for debugging, researchers say. Quote, new study shows why simulated reasoning AI models don't yet live up to their billing. Quote, AI-generated code could be a disaster for the software supply chain. Quote, reinforcement learning does not fundamentally improve the AI models. Quote, OpenAI's O3 AI model scores lower on a benchmark than the company initially implied. Quote, OpenAI's new reasoning AI models hallucinate more. I could keep going on both sides, actually, but hopefully you get the point by now. So let's talk about the disconnect from one of the many hundred daily AI YouTube channels. But I think this statement sums the misunderstanding up perfectly. We are getting farther on code, by the way, than on other areas because code has such a clean reward system. The code runs or it doesn't. The code is clean or it isn't. Very, very easy to measure. This is so wrong on so many levels. Let me illustrate this with a quick story. The most unbelievable bug report I ever received in my career was back in the 1990s when I was a consultant. I had written some code for Motorola in Arlington Heights, Illinois, that had, I was told, been running at several different Motorola sites for a year or more. My contract had been over, I didn't even have a copy of the code anymore, and suddenly I get this phone call that the software had stopped working all at once across all the sites. And my response, of course, was, well, it's been running for more than a year, what'd you change? And of course, I got back, nothing, we didn't touch it. And of course, we've all heard that before. And I was skeptical. But we went through all the paperwork so they could send me the code and the logs, and sure enough, I had made a mistake. Part of my code was comparing two numbers to determine which was the newer transaction, except that the programming language I was using wasn't strongly typed, and I had used the wrong type of less than sign, so that it was comparing the numbers as strings and not as numbers. So after many months, when the numbers had rolled from 99,000 something over to 100,000 something, that 1 came earlier in the alphabet than 9, so 100,000 was less than 99,999. Now, give me a break. This was 15 years before Golang and 20 years before Rust. But that doesn't seem like a clean reward system to me. For more than a year, we believed that code ran fine. Only long after we stopped worrying about it did we find out that it actually didn't. But that kind of thing happens all the time. That's just the reality of software. But it's hardly taken into account at all during discussions about AI code generation. So let's go back to that quote from OpenAI's chief product officer that I told you to put a pin in. This is the year that, at least by competitive coding benchmarks, AI becomes better than humans at competitive coding forever, which became the headline, AI will beat human coders by the end of 2025. And that's the crux of the problem. People largely do not understand the difference between competitive coding benchmarks and software engineering. And in their defense, neither does the idiotic way that the industry interviews and hires people. There are a few people in the AI space that ought to know better, but they mostly intentionally conflate the two because the confusion works to their advantage. Now, I've been thinking about this a lot and talking to non-technical folks, trying to get them to understand, and I think I've hit upon an analogy that seems to work at least better than anything else I've found. So here it is. Competitive coding benchmarks are like solving a riddle, but software development is like solving a murder. Riddles have an answer, and they are set up to make it at least possible for the recipient to get that answer, or if not that, at least to recognize how the answer fits when they hear the answer after they've given up trying to solve it. Either they get the answer to the riddle, or they don't. Solving murders, on the other hand, at least according to popular culture, documentaries, true crime podcasts, all the kind of stuff that the person you're talking to theoretically will understand, is messy. It's time-consuming, it involves people, often with agendas, there's no built-in answer. Sometimes it turns out there wasn't a crime committed at all. It was just a death that looks suspicious. Sometimes you think you got everything right, but you can't get enough evidence to prove it. Sometimes you think you have it all figured out, but then a year and a half later, you get a phone call that a new piece of evidence just appeared, and it turns out you were wrong all along. You just didn't know it because you weren't looking in the right place. Sometimes it even turns out that a bad person went out of their way to trick you into thinking that somebody else did it. That's like software development in the real world. A lot of the time, there are no easy answers. You have to use skill and experience to do the best that you can. And skill in solving riddles helps not at all, not even a little bit. And in my experience, a fairly high percentage of people who pride themselves at being good at programming riddles are well below average when it comes to getting real work done in a reliable, maintainable way. So the next time someone tells you that AI is going to take over the world or sends you a headline about how it's going to be better than all humans by the end of 2025, try talking to them and comparing it to the difference between riddles and murders and see how it goes. And then let me know in the comments. Maybe you'll come up with a better analogy, but that's the best I've been able to do so far, and I've been trying for a while. And I'm going to still be here trying to do my best to get more people to understand the difference, because maybe it might help. And I'm too stubborn to give up at this point anyway. Toward that end, though, I'm posting a channel update video alongside this one to explain that I'm spinning off a different channel to deal with the deeper topics and leaving this one to be more accessible to a wider audience who might not be really technical, but who needs to understand what's behind the hype. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out for that video. If it hasn't posted yet, it will very soon. And so, until next time, remember that the internet is full of bugs, and anyone who says differently doesn't understand the difference between a riddle and a murder. Let's be careful out there.